When did the truth not set you free? I was eating breakfast when CPS barged through the front door. We need to talk to you about grape allegations from 6-year-old Vera Hines. In seconds, the officers were escorting me out, while my 2 daughters stared at me like I was a monster. At the station, I tried to stay calm while asking for evidence, and that's when the detective pulled out a drawing Vera had made. My bedroom, drawn perfectly to a T. I'd never heard of this girl before in my life. This has to be some kind of mistake, my lawyer chimed in. Well then, show me OP's left shoulder. I pulled down my shirt, and the officer went white. That's the exact birthmark Vera described. When they finally told me my girls were being placed with my mother-in-law, who tried to hit them when they were younger, I actually threw up. My wife picked me up and kept saying, "I believe you, I know you'd never." But her eyes had this look of fear I'd never seen before, like she already thought I was guilty. 2 days later, they brought me to see Vera through a two-way glass. The moment they brought me into view, she pointed directly at me. That's him. That's the man who hurt me. The worst part was when she described in vivid detail about what I'd done to make her afraid of adults forever. Every word felt like a knife, because I could see everyone in that room deciding I was guilty. My wife confirmed she'd never seen Vera at our house either. She lived 40 minutes away in a completely different school district. Her parents looked at our photos with blank faces, saying they'd never seen us before. I practically begged to take a polygraph. But when the examiner saw the results, his face went pale. Deception on every single question. Even when asked if my name was really mine, or if I was human. The second polygraph at a different facility came back the same way, but of course, they still used the answers against me. And my daughters started asking my MIL why I hurt that little girl, because kids at school were talking. When my 5-year-old flinched when I reached to hug her, I broke down sobbing. The forensic psychologist evaluated Vera and told the court she showed genuine trauma responses with no signs of coaching. Meanwhile, this child I'd never met knew about the scar on my inner thigh from surgery. She knew what side of the bed I slept on, and the exact cologne scent I used, all details confirmed by my wife. I was right in front of Vera when she said, "The man said the camera in the bathroom was our secret game." I was so desperate for this to make sense that I thought the nightmare was over when the investigators never found the camera. Except there was a small hole exactly where she said it would be. The forensics team said the hole was drilled from inside the wall, physically impossible without tearing the bathroom apart. My wife instantly let go of my hand, and my girls never came home with me again. A few days later, when the news broke, my job suspended me without pay. The grocery store manager asked me to shop elsewhere after other customers complained. So I did what I had to do, and spent everything I had left on a private investigator. 3 weeks later, he found security footage of my wife and kids at a park with Vera and her mom, dated 1 month before the allegations. But that wasn't all. He discovered my wife had withdrawn $15,000 cash over 6 weeks before the allegations. He also discovered that Vera's mom worked at the same yoga studio my wife attended, despite my wife claiming she'd quit yoga years ago. My blood went cold. During my supervised visit with my daughters, I showed them the security footage of the park, and they got excited. "That's Vera from our play dates," my 8-year-old exclaimed. "Mommy gave Vera our house key to play hide and seek," my 6-year-old added. Then the worst part, "Mommy told us it's a special game and we can't tell Daddy or he'll lose." Well, a few weeks ago, they swore they'd never even heard of her. The supervisor documented everything and called CPS immediately. For one beautiful moment, I thought the nightmare was ending. The next morning, my wife filed an emergency motion claiming I was coaching the children. The judge decided the footage was inadmissible in court, and my daughter's statements were contaminated by exposure to evidence. My wife got full custody that afternoon. I knew what I had to do next. I sat in my car outside the courthouse for 20 minutes with my hands shaking so bad I could barely hold my phone. I scrolled through lawyers who handled false accusations until I found Jonas Reed's website. His bio said he'd been falsely accused himself 10 years ago and won. I called his office and got his voicemail, but then my phone rang back 2 minutes later. Jonas listened to me explain everything in a rush, without interrupting once. He told me to meet him at his office tomorrow morning at 8 and to start writing down every single thing I could remember from the past year. That night I couldn't sleep, so I opened my laptop and started making spreadsheets. I typed out every date my wife said she was working late, or going to her sister's, or had book club. I went through our bank statements and credit card bills looking for anything weird. I found receipts for restaurants I'd never been to, and hotel charges from when she said she was at conferences. I wrote down every time she'd been weird about her phone or changed her password or got defensive when I asked simple questions. By 4 in the morning, I had 15 pages of notes and my eyes were burning. Jonas's office was in a strip mall between a nail salon and a tax place. He was younger than I expected, with tattoos on his forearms and a beard. He read through my notes and the court documents while I sat there sweating through my shirt. He kept shaking his head and making marks with a red pen. He pointed out that Vera's descriptions were way too perfect for a 6-year-old. She used words like perpetrator and systematic that no kid that age would know. He'd seen this exact pattern in 3 other cases where kids were coached. He pulled out a yellow legal pad and started writing down everything we needed to request from the court. We filed an emergency motion that afternoon, asking for all the CPS investigation notes and any recordings of Vera's interviews. Jonas warned me it would take weeks to get everything, but we had to be patient and build our case right. The court clerk looked at me with disgust when I signed the papers. 2 days later, I got evicted from our house since my wife had changed the locks, and I couldn't afford the mortgage alone anyway. I found a motel off the highway that rented by the week for $300. The owner recognized me from the news but took my money anyway and told me his brother had been through something similar. The room smelled like cigarettes, and the bed was hard, but at least I had somewhere to sleep. My first supervised visit was scheduled for the next Tuesday at a government building downtown. I got there 30 minutes early and sat in my car trying not to throw up. The supervisor was a woman in her 50s who explained all the rules without looking at me. No physical contact unless the kids initiated it. No talking about the case or their mother or anything legal. No gifts or food without prior approval. The room had cameras in every corner and a big mirror that was obviously two-way glass. My daughters came in holding hands and looking scared. They ran toward me for a hug, but then stopped halfway and looked back at the supervisor. She nodded, and they came the rest of the way, but their hugs were stiff and quick. We played with blocks and colored pictures while I tried not to cry. My 6-year-old kept looking at the cameras and whispering that Mommy had been crying every night. She said Mommy was on the phone with Vera's mom all the time talking about grown-up stuff. The supervisor wrote everything down in her notebook and reminded me not to ask questions about Mommy. My 8-year-old drew a picture of our family, but with me standing far away from everyone else. When the hour was up, they both clung to me and begged to come home. I had to watch the supervisor take them back to my mother-in-law while they cried. 3 days later, Jonas called me excited about something he'd found. He'd subpoenaed our home renovation records from 2 years ago and discovered the bathroom remodel happened at the exact same time my wife started taking out cash. The contractor's invoice showed the work was done in March and April, which matched perfectly with the $15,000 in withdrawals. He'd also found something weird in the permits. My wife had specifically requested changes to the plans that involved opening up the wall behind the bathroom. Jonas added everything to our evidence file and said this was huge. The next week, I found a support group for falsely accused parents that met at a church on Thursday nights. There were 8 other people there, including a woman whose ex-husband had coached their son to lie about her. One dad had been fighting for 3 years and had just gotten supervised visits increased to twice a week. He told me his ex-wife had done almost the same thing with coach testimony and fake evidence. He said the key was staying calm and documenting everything and never giving up even when it felt hopeless. He'd spent $60,000 on lawyers and lost his house and his job, but he was slowly winning. Another guy warned me that my wife would probably escalate once she realized I was fighting back. 2 weeks later, the bank finally sent over the security footage Jonas had requested. The videos showed my wife at the ATM getting small bills every time. The teller who helped her remembered her saying she needed cash to pay contractors who didn't take checks. But Jonas had already confirmed with the renovation company that we'd paid them with a credit card for the whole job. There were no contractor receipts for any cash payments. Jonas smiled when he showed me the footage and said we were building a solid case that would destroy her credibility. Jonas spent the next week tracking down every contractor who worked on our house in the past 5 years. He found Emilio Arias through old permit records at the city office. Emilio ran a small construction company and remembered our bathroom remodel from 2 years ago. When Jonas showed him photos of our bathroom, Emilio's face changed completely. He pulled out his phone and started scrolling through old job photos from our house. He showed Jonas pictures of my wife standing in the bathroom, pointing at the wall behind the toilet. She'd asked him to drill a hole there before putting up the drywall, saying she needed it for a moisture sensor. Emilio thought it was weird because moisture sensors don't go behind walls like that. He'd kept detailed notes about the request because it didn't make sense to him. My wife had paid him an extra $500 in cash for the extra work. He still had the receipt in his files showing the cash payment separate from the main job. Jonas took photos of everything and got Emilio to sign a statement about what happened. 3 weeks into our investigation, a thick envelope arrived at Jonas's office from the court. The CPS discovery notes were finally here, after multiple requests and delays. Jonas called me immediately, and I drove straight to his office to review them together. The original investigator's handwritten notes were different from the typed report submitted to court. She'd written multiple times that Vera's story seemed rehearsed and too detailed for a 6-year-old. She noted that Vera used adult words that most kids her age wouldn't know. The investigator recommended more investigation before taking any action against me. But her supervisor had written notes in red pen all over the margins demanding immediate action. The supervisor insisted the case was too serious to delay and overruled every doubt the investigator raised. Jonas made copies of everything and highlighted the differences between the original notes and final report. The stress was eating me alive, so Jonas gave me the name of a therapist who worked with parents in custody battles. I started seeing her twice a week at her office downtown near the courthouse. She taught me breathing exercises to use when I felt like I was going to panic in court. We practiced staying calm when people said terrible things about me that weren't true. She helped me understand that judges watch how parents act under pressure during custody hearings. Staying calm and organized would show I was stable even when everything was falling apart around me. She gave me a notebook to write down my thoughts, instead of letting them spin in my head all night. The breathing techniques actually helped when I had to sit through hearings listening to lies about me. During my next supervised visit, my 8-year-old was quiet and spent most of the time drawing. She made a picture of our family standing in front of our house like she always did, but this time she'd drawn my wife with a big black X through her whole body. The supervisor asked her what the picture meant, but she just shook her head and kept coloring. She added more black over my wife, until you couldn't see her at all anymore. My 6-year-old looked at the picture and said, "Mommy wasn't nice anymore," but wouldn't say why. The supervisor wrote everything down in her report and took a photo of the drawing for the file. Both girls seemed scared to talk about their mom, even though I didn't ask them anything about her. Jonas filed paperwork, asking the court to appoint someone called a guardian ad litem for the girls. He explained this was a special lawyer just for kids who would investigate what was best for them. The court approved the request and appointed Kira Thorne to represent my daughter's interests in the case. Kira had 20 years of experience with custody cases and a reputation for seeing through parental manipulation. She would interview both girls separately and make her own recommendations to the judge about custody. Jonas said having Kira involved was huge because judges really listened to what she said about kids. The yoga studio finally sent over the records Jonas had been demanding for months through legal requests. The sign-in sheets showed my wife attending classes 3 times every single week for the past year. Every single class she attended was also attended by Vera's mom, according to the records. They'd signed in one after the other on the sheets, arriving at the exact same time consistently. The studio manager included a note saying the 2 women always came together and left together. She remembered them because they'd requested to always be next to each other in class. Jonas added the records to our evidence binder, which was now 3 inches thick with documents. My phone rang while I was at the motel, and it was my former coworker from the job I'd lost. He said he'd been thinking about something weird that happened 2 months before the allegations started. My wife had come to the office asking the HR department about my life insurance policies. She wanted to know how much they were worth and who the beneficiary was listed as. He thought it was strange at the time, but didn't want to get involved in marital stuff. Now, with everything happening, he felt guilty for not saying something sooner about her questions. Jonas had me meet with Emilio again to go over more details about the bathroom work. Emilio brought a box of receipts and photos from every job he'd done that year. He found the receipt showing my wife paid him $500 cash for additional work. The receipt had a note in his handwriting saying the payment was for drilling behind the bathroom wall. He agreed to testify in court about what my wife asked him to do with the wall. He said he'd kept such detailed records because the request was so unusual for a bathroom job. During my therapy session, I suddenly remembered something from last year that I'd completely forgotten about. I'd found my wife's journal when I was looking for a pen in her desk drawer. She'd written pages about feeling trapped in our marriage and wanting to start over somewhere new. She wrote about hating her life and needing to find a way out that wouldn't make her look bad. I'd put the journal back and never said anything because I thought she was just venting. Now I realized she'd been planning her exit strategy for months before any of this started. Kira Thorne scheduled interviews with both my daughters at a special facility designed for talking to kids. The room had toys and art supplies to help kids feel comfortable while answering questions about their home. She spent 2 hours with each girl separately, recording everything while they played and talked together. Her report to the court said both girls showed clear signs of coaching by an adult. They used identical phrases when talking about me that didn't match how kids their age normally talk. She noted they seemed confused about what was real and what they'd been told to say. Both girls told her they missed living with Daddy, but Mommy said they couldn't anymore. Kira's report recommended immediate further investigation into potential parental alienation by their mother against me. The next morning, Jonas called me while I was making instant coffee in my motel room. The prosecutor wanted to meet about maybe dropping the charges. They planned to have specialists interview Vera again to check for coaching. I drove to Jonas's office, and we went through all our evidence one more time. He showed me the bank records and the yoga studio sign-in sheets. Everything pointed to my wife planning this for months. 2 days later, I had another supervised visit scheduled with my daughters. My mother-in-law brought them this time instead of the usual social worker. She stood there in the waiting room glaring at me like I was some kind of monster. She started saying loud enough for everyone to hear that she couldn't believe what I'd done to that poor little girl. The supervisor immediately stepped between us and told her to stop. She wrote down everything my mother-in-law said in her notebook. My girls looked confused and scared during the whole visit. They kept asking why Grandma was so mad at me. I just told them everything would be okay soon. Jonas called me that afternoon with more news about Vera's mom. He'd found court records showing she owed $30,000 in credit card debt. She'd also been fired from the yoga studio 3 weeks before the allegations started. The studio manager said she'd been stealing from the cash register. Jonas figured my wife's $15,000 was keeping Vera's mom from losing her apartment. Everything was starting to make sense now. I was at the grocery store buying more instant noodles when I ran into my older daughter's teacher. She looked around to make sure nobody was listening before she came over. She told me both girls had been acting strange at the school lately. They kept changing their stories about what happened at home. One day they'd say I was mean to them, and the next they'd say they missed me. The teacher said it seemed like they didn't know what was real anymore. She gave me her personal number and said to call if I needed anything. Jonas brought in Bonnie Fisher to look at all the financial records we'd gathered. She spent 3 days going through bank statements and payment app records. She found $5,000 that went straight from my wife to Vera's mom. The payments were labeled as yoga class refunds, but the amounts didn't match any real classes. Bonnie made copies of everything and created a timeline showing when each payment happened. Every single payment came right before Vera gave another statement to CPS. During my next supervised visit, something weird happened. My 6-year-old was playing with the toys in the corner when she suddenly pointed at the supervisor. She called her the camera lady like at Vera's house. The supervisor asked what she meant by that. My daughter immediately went quiet and said Mommy told her not to talk about the games. The supervisor wrote everything down and asked more questions, but my daughter wouldn't say anything else. She just kept playing with her toys and acting like nothing happened. Jonas filed papers, asking the court to let an expert examine the bathroom wall. He wanted someone independent to look at that hole Vera described. The judge approved it, and we set up the inspection for the following week. Both sides would send people to watch the examination happen. My wife's lawyer called Jonas the next day trying to make a deal. He said my wife would drop the custody fight if I agreed to give up my parental rights. Jonas actually laughed at him on the phone. He told the lawyer we had proof of the conspiracy now, and we were going for full custody. The lawyer hung up without saying anything else. The day of the wall inspection finally came. The expert brought special cameras and measuring tools to examine the hole. He spent 2 hours looking at every angle and taking pictures of everything. He measured the depth and checked the edges with a magnifying glass. His report said the hole was definitely drilled from inside the wall cavity. He explained that someone would need access during construction to do this. There was no way to drill it after the wall was finished without tearing the whole bathroom apart. He found tool marks that matched the kind of drill bits contractors use. Meanwhile, Vera was meeting with new specialists who were trained to spot coaching in kids. They spent 4 hours with her using special techniques to check her story. During the interview, Vera started crying and said she didn't want to play the remembering game anymore. The specialist asked what she meant by the remembering game. Vera said her mommy's friend taught her what to remember about the bad man. She said she got treats when she remembered everything right. The specialist noted all the signs of coaching in their report. They said Vera's story changed depending on how questions were asked. When they asked open questions, she couldn't give details. But when they asked specific things, she repeated the exact same phrases every time. The report said this was classic coaching behavior in young children. Jonas added all these new reports to our evidence binder, which was getting huge. 3 weeks passed before Kira finished her investigation and told the court I should get overnight visits with my daughters. The judge signed the order that same afternoon, and I spent the rest of the day cleaning my motel room and buying sleeping bags since I only had one bed. When I picked them up Friday evening, they both ran to me and wouldn't let go of my arms the whole drive back. That first night, they climbed into my bed around midnight, saying they had bad dreams, and we all squeezed together on the small mattress. My 6-year-old kept touching my face every few minutes like she was making sure I was really there. Saturday morning, we made pancakes on the motel's hot plate, and they laughed when the smoke alarm went off from the burnt edges. My wife called the visitation center 5 times that weekend, claiming I wasn't answering her texts about the girls' medication schedule. The supervisor pulled up the logs, showing I'd responded to every single message within 10 minutes. Monday morning, my wife filed an emergency motion, saying I'd taken the girls outside the approved radius and bought them food that violated their dietary restrictions. The visitation center had cameras in the parking lot, showing we never left the property, and receipts proved I only bought approved snacks. The judge actually raised his voice during the hearing and told my wife that one more false report would result in contempt charges. Jonas spent that whole week digging through old records at the courthouse and found something interesting in the divorce attorney files. My wife had met with 3 different lawyers starting 6 months before any of this happened. The first attorney's note said she asked about getting full custody if her husband was unfit and what kind of proof she'd need. The second attorney wrote that she specifically asked about nuclear options and whether abuse allegations would guarantee sole custody. The third attorney actually refused to take her case and noted she seemed more interested in destroying me than protecting the children. Jonas made copies of everything and added them to our growing pile of evidence. During my next overnight visit, my 8-year-old started talking while we were coloring at the small table. She said Mommy had been making them practice conversations about what to tell the judge and the counselors. She showed me on her fingers how many times they practiced saying Daddy was mean and scary. My 6-year-old nodded and said, Mommy told them it wasn't lying because it would keep everyone safe. I asked what they meant by safe, and my oldest said, Mommy told them I might take them away forever if they didn't say the right things. The supervisor was in the room documenting everything while trying to look like she was just reading a magazine. Emilio called Jonas the next day, saying he'd found his old phone with photos from the bathroom remodel. He came to Jonas's office with printed copies, showing my wife pointing at the exact spot where she wanted him to drill. In one photo, she was holding a measuring tape against the wall, and in another, she had drawn an X with pencil. The metadata showed these pictures were taken 3 weeks before the first allegation was made. Emilio said my wife told him she needed the hole for a special cable she was going to run later, but she paid him an extra $500 in cash to do it exactly where she wanted. He still had the receipt for the special drill bit she made him buy just for that one hole. 2 days later, Jonas got a call from someone at CPS who wouldn't give their name at first. After Jonas promised confidentiality, the woman said she was the investigator who first looked at Vera's case and had serious doubts. She said her supervisor pressured her to push it through anyway and threatened her job when she wanted to dig deeper. She agreed to testify if subpoenaed, but only with protection from retaliation. Jonas filed the subpoena that afternoon. I'd been applying for jobs everywhere but getting rejected as soon as they Googled my name. Then I got a call from a small shipping company whose owner wanted to meet me in person. When I walked into his office, he told me he'd been falsely accused by his ex-wife 5 years ago and lost everything before proving his innocence. He offered me part-time work in the warehouse with flexible hours for court dates. I started the next Monday, and it felt good to have something normal in my life again, even if it was just moving boxes. My wife's sister called me out of nowhere saying she needed to talk about something important. She drove 2 hours to meet me at a coffee shop and told me my wife had been acting strange for over a year. She said my wife called her last year after I mentioned wanting to try couples counseling and spent an hour ranting about how she'd make me pay for suggesting she wasn't perfect. Her own mother called the next week saying she was worried about the girls because my wife kept coaching them on what to say to people. She'd overheard my wife on the phone with someone saying the plan was working perfectly, and soon she'd have everything. During my next overnight visit, the girls found a box of old photos I'd grabbed from the house before everything fell apart. They spent 3 hours going through every picture and asking me to tell them the stories behind each one. My 6-year-old found a picture from her 4th birthday and asked if we could have parties like that again. My 8-year-old looked at a photo from our last family vacation and asked if we could be a normal family again someday. I had to turn away so they wouldn't see me trying not to cry. The next morning, Jonas called saying the prosecutor wanted to meet with us immediately. We sat in a conference room while the prosecutor laid out all the problems with the case, including Vera's coach testimony and the evidence of conspiracy. He said he was formally dropping all criminal charges due to insufficient evidence and credible doubt about the allegations. Jonas barely waited for him to finish talking before pulling out his phone to file an emergency custody modification based on the dropped charges. 3 days passed before my wife's attorney called Jonas, asking for a meeting at his office downtown. We sat across from him while he shuffled papers and kept clearing his throat before finally saying he was withdrawing from the case due to irreconcilable differences with his client. Jonas barely hid his smile because we both knew what that meant in lawyer speak. The attorney wouldn't look my wife in the eye when she stormed into his office demanding an explanation, and he just kept repeating that their professional relationship had become untenable. She threw her purse at him and screamed that he was abandoning her when she needed him most. Security had to escort her out while she kept yelling about suing him for malpractice. That same afternoon, Kira submitted her final report to the court, recommending immediate custody reversal based on clear evidence of psychological manipulation and coaching. She documented 17 separate instances where my daughters showed signs of being forced to lie, including physical symptoms like stomach aches and nightmares that started right after the allegations. The report detailed how both girls displayed classic signs of parental alienation syndrome and were suffering measurable psychological harm from being separated from me. Jonas got the emergency hearing scheduled for the following week and warned me my wife might try something desperate now that everything was falling apart. Sure enough, 2 days before court, she filed new allegations claiming I'd been stalking her and making threatening phone calls, but she couldn't produce any evidence or recordings. The morning of the hearing, my daughter's therapist took the stand first and testified for 40 minutes about the trauma she'd observed in both girls. She explained how they showed anxiety not from abuse, but from being coached to lie about their father, describing specific behaviors like nail-biting and bedwetting that had started after the separation. She recommended immediate intervention to prevent long-term psychological damage and said every day of continued separation was causing measurable harm. My wife took the stand next and immediately contradicted herself when Jonas asked about her relationship with Vera's family. First, she said she'd never met them, then admitted maybe she'd seen them at yoga once, then finally claimed they might have talked a few times, but she couldn't remember. The judge's eyebrows kept rising higher with each new version of her story. When Jonas showed her the bank records of the $15,000 in cash withdrawals, she claimed it was for home repairs, but couldn't produce a single receipt. She said the contractor only took cash and she'd lost his contact information. The judge actually rolled his eyes when she insisted the security footage of her at the park with Vera must be someone who looked like her. Jonas asked her to explain how Vera knew about my birthmark and scar, and she just kept saying she had no idea over and over. Then Vera's mom was called to testify, and the whole courtroom went silent when she immediately stated she was invoking her Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. Jonas asked if she knew my wife, and she pleaded the Fifth. He asked about the money transfers, and she pleaded the Fifth again. Every single question got the same response while she stared at the floor, and her lawyer whispered in her ear. The judge took a 15-minute recess to review all the evidence, and when he came back, his face was red with anger. He said in 23 years on the bench, he'd never seen such an egregious case of parental alienation and false allegations designed to destroy an innocent parent. He ordered immediate temporary custody to me, pending a full investigation into what he called a criminal conspiracy to deprive children of their father. My wife started sobbing and begging for another chance, but the judge told her to be quiet, or he'd hold her in contempt. That afternoon, a social worker brought my daughters to my apartment with their bags, and they ran into my arms so hard they almost knocked me over. We spent the evening making mac and cheese with hot dogs cut up in it, because that's their favorite dinner, and they kept looking around like they couldn't believe they were really home. My 6-year-old asked me 4 times if this was real, or if they had to go back to Grandma's house. My 8-year-old wouldn't let go of my hand even when we were eating. I tucked them into their beds that I'd kept made for months, and they both asked to sleep in my room instead. We all piled into my bed and watched cartoons until they fell asleep, holding onto my arms. The next morning, CPS called to inform me they were opening an investigation into my wife for child psychological abuse and coaching. The same investigator who'd first doubted Vera's story was now assigned to build a case about what my wife had put our daughters through. She came to interview the girls with a child specialist who used dolls and drawings to help them express what had happened. Both girls drew pictures of their mom yelling at them to remember their lines and making them practice what to say about daddy. 2 weeks later, the judge issued his final ruling ordering my wife to pay $800 a month in child support and undergo psychological evaluation before any visitation could be considered. The evaluator's report came back diagnosing her with narcissistic personality disorder, with recommendations for extensive therapy before any contact with the children. She was given supervised visitation for 2 hours every other Sunday at a court facility, but only after completing a parenting class and anger management course. The therapist's office had toys everywhere, and my girls sat on the floor playing while she watched them carefully during that first session. She told me they'd need weekly sessions for at least 6 months to work through what their mom had done to them. Jonas had already started preparing the civil lawsuit paperwork and brought me stacks of documents to sign at his office downtown. He calculated the damages at over $200,000 between lost wages, legal fees, and emotional distress costs. The lawsuit named my wife personally since her actions were criminal and outside any normal divorce proceedings. 3 months passed with the girls going to therapy every Tuesday, while I drove them to the school each morning and picked them up each afternoon. Their teachers pulled me aside during parent conferences to say how much better they were doing in class now. My 8-year-old had stopped having nightmares, and my 6-year-old wasn't crying at random times anymore like she had been. The prosecutor called to tell me they were filing criminal charges against my wife for conspiracy, false reports, and child endangerment after reviewing all the evidence. They'd also charged Vera's mom as a co-conspirator after finding text messages between them, planning the whole thing for months. The texts showed them discussing payment amounts and how to coach Vera to make the story believable. My wife hired a criminal defense attorney who tried to negotiate a plea deal right away since the evidence was overwhelming. The divorce papers came through the mail with the judge's signature giving me full custody and ownership of the house. My wife had to pay $800 in monthly child support plus $50,000 in restitution for the financial damage she'd caused. The judge wrote in his ruling that her criminal behavior forfeited any claim to marital assets. My old boss called to offer me my job back full-time with a raise to make up for what I'd been through. I started the next Monday, and my co-workers had decorated my desk with welcome back signs and cards. Nobody asked questions about what happened, and they just treated me like I'd been on a long vacation. Saturday mornings became pancake time, where the girls would help mix the batter and flip them on the griddle. Sunday afternoons, we'd go to the park and feed the ducks or play on the swings for hours. These new routines helped them feel safe and gave us something to look forward to each week. My wife's lawyer called Jonas to say she'd take a plea deal for 2 years probation instead of potential jail time. The conditions included mandatory therapy, no contact with us, and she could only request supervised visits after completing a year of treatment. The prosecutor agreed, since it saved the girls from having to testify in a criminal trial. Vera's mom wasn't as lucky and got sentenced to 6 months in county jail plus 3 years probation. She had to pay $20,000 in restitution and register as someone who'd committed crimes against children. The judge ordered Vera into therapy to help her understand how the adults in her life had used her. A full year after everything started, I watched my oldest score her first soccer goal, while my youngest did a perfect pirouette at her dance recital. They'd joined activities they actually wanted to do, instead of what their mom had forced them into before. Both girls made friends at their activities and had sleepovers at our house every other weekend. The therapist said they'd made amazing progress and only needed monthly check-ins now instead of weekly sessions. She showed me drawings they'd made early in therapy, full of dark colors and sad faces, compared to recent ones with rainbows and smiling families. My oldest told me she wanted to try out for the school play, and my youngest asked if she could take art classes too. I signed them up for everything they wanted to try, to watch them grow more confident each day. The house felt peaceful now without the constant tension that used to hang in the air when their mom lived there. We repainted their rooms in colors they picked out and hung up all their artwork on the walls. The bathroom where that hole had been drilled got completely remodeled to remove any reminder of what happened. My daughters helped pick out the new tiles and fixtures, making it truly ours instead of tainted by bad memories. Jonas closed out the civil case after my wife's insurance company settled for $150,000. The money went into college funds for the girls and paying off the debts from the legal battle. He kept all the case files in storage in case we ever needed them again for any reason. The girls asked about their mom sometimes, and I told them she was sick and getting help to be better. They seemed to understand without needing more details and didn't push for visits with her. Their therapist said this was healthy and showed they felt secure in their new life with me. We took a camping trip to the mountains where we roasted marshmallows and told ghost stories by the fire. The girls caught their first fish, and we cooked it over the campfire even though it was tiny. These were the memories I wanted them to have instead of courtrooms and lawyers and lies. The support group met every Thursday at the community center downtown, and I walked in carrying cookies my daughters helped bake the night before. 20 other parents sat in metal folding chairs, and when I told them about winning custody back, they started clapping, and some even cried. One dad grabbed my shoulder and said, my case gave him hope after 3 years of fighting his ex's lies about him. The group leader asked me to share what worked, and I spent an hour going through every piece of evidence we'd gathered and how Jonas had presented it. 3 parents wrote down Jonas's number, and 2 more asked about the private investigator I'd hired. After the meeting, A mom whose kids hadn't talked to her in 2 years hugged me and said she was calling her lawyer tomorrow to try my approach. The state bar sent Jonas a letter saying they were investigating my wife's first attorney for ethics violations after he'd kept pushing a case with obvious problems. Jonas forwarded me the complaint they filed, showing 17 different issues, including ignoring evidence and helping fabricate testimony. The investigation took 6 months, but eventually that lawyer got suspended for a year and had to pay a huge fine. Other lawyers in town started being way more careful about taking false allegation cases without checking facts first. My daughters and I got closer than we'd ever been, and they started telling me everything about school and friends and crushes. My oldest would crawl into my bed at night to talk about her day, and my youngest started leaving me notes in my lunchbox. They'd run to hug me when I got home from work and fought over who got to sit next to me at dinner. The therapist said she'd never seen kids bounce back so fast from that kind of trauma. We found a house for rent on the other side of town with a big backyard and a tree perfect for a swing. The girls picked purple for one bedroom and blue for the other, and we spent a whole weekend painting together. They hung up posters and arranged their stuffed animals and made the place feel like home right away. The landlord was an older woman who'd read about our case and gave us the first month free. Every few weeks, one of them would ask about their mom, and I'd just say she was sick and doctors were helping her get better. They'd nod and change the subject, but sometimes I'd catch them looking sad when other kids talked about their moms. The therapist helped me find the right words to explain things without making them hate her. I told them grown-ups sometimes make bad choices when they're confused or scared. My boss called me into his office on a random Tuesday and offered me a promotion to team lead with a $20,000 raise. He said watching me handle everything while never missing work or dropping the ball on projects showed real character. The promotion meant we could start saving for college, and I could finally replace my old car. My co-workers threw a little party in the break room with a cake that said, "Congratulations." Father's Day came around and both girls gave me handmade cards they'd worked on for weeks in secret. My oldest wrote that I was her hero for never giving up even when everyone said mean things about me. My youngest drew pictures of us at the park and wrote, "I love you, Daddy," in huge letters across the top. I keep those cards in my nightstand drawer and look at them whenever I have a bad day. Jonas started using our case to train other lawyers about defending false allegations and asked if I'd speak at a conference. I stood in front of 200 attorneys and told them exactly what we'd been through and what evidence saved us. Afterwards, dozens of them came up to thank me and say they'd use our strategies to help their clients. Jonas said we'd probably saved hundreds of families from going through what we did. My oldest came home from the school one day and announced she wanted to be a lawyer when she grew up. Her teacher had asked the class about career goals, and she'd told everyone she wanted to help families stay together. The teacher pulled me aside at pickup to say my daughter gave a whole speech about how important truth was. She'd apparently made half the class cry with her story about almost losing her dad to lies. We saved up for months and finally took a real vacation to the beach for a whole week. The girls had never seen the ocean before and spent hours jumping waves and hunting for shells. We built sandcastles every morning and ate ice cream every night, and nobody mentioned lawyers or court once. I watched them playing in the sand and realized this was what I'd been fighting for all along. They were just kids having fun without any weight on their shoulders or secrets to keep. 6 months after the beach trip, I met Sarah at the support group for parents who'd been through false accusations. She sat next to me during the meeting and passed me tissues when I started telling my story again. After the meeting, we talked in the parking lot for 2 hours about how hard it was to trust anyone after what we'd been through. She'd lost custody of her son for 8 months before proving her ex had coached him to lie about abuse. We started getting coffee after the weekly meetings, and she understood why I checked my phone constantly to make sure the girls were okay. She never pushed or asked to meet them, even though I talked about them nonstop. 3 months later, I finally asked if she wanted to come to the park with us on a Saturday. The girls were shy at first, but Sarah brought sidewalk chalk and started drawing hopscotch squares without trying to force conversation. My youngest joined her first, and then my oldest started adding her own drawings to the concrete. Sarah came to the park with us every few weeks after that, and the girls started asking when we'd see her again. She remembered their favorite colors and brought them books she thought they'd like, but never tried to be their mom. One night, my oldest asked if Sarah was my girlfriend, and when I said yes, she just nodded and said she seemed nice. We took things slow, and Sarah understood when I had to cancel plans because one of the girls had a bad dream about their mom coming back. A year later, we're still together, and the girls trust her enough to stay with her when I have to work late. Looking back at everything we went through, I see how much stronger we got as a family. My daughters know I'll always fight for them no matter what anyone says or does. Hey, Thanks for letting me wander through all this with you today. That was a fun ride. I really appreciate you sticking around. I'll see you next time. If you made it to the end, drop a comment. I love reading all your comments.